Sacred Sites with Steve Ray, here on Morning Joy, where truth matters.
Let's go on our adventure today. Last week we started with Paul traveling to Ephesus and what it was like to do all of those travels and how tough it was and what a manly man he was. But now we're arriving in Ephesus, and you know you're getting close because the traffic jam is starting to build up. There's chariots almost knocking you off the road, and there's people dressed in togas and their swords and shields, and women dressed with their long flowing gowns. And we're entering into Ephesus. Now, I know when we arrive in Ephesus or anywhere else in our bus, the first thing everybody wants to know is, where's the toilets? Where's the toilets? They want to know. This is the first thing. It's the most important site that we visit every day on a pilgrimage. And sure enough, they had toilets here too, public toilets, but they were only for men. And they were made out of stone, and they're like a slab, and there's the holes every like 3 feet, and there's no partition. So you just kind of sit there and you're talking to the guy next to you while you're sitting on the toilet. And when it's cold, they would send their servants ahead to sit there and warm up the stone seats for them. So anyway, that after we get the toilets taken care of. See, I mean, I'm a very earthy guy. You got to get used to that. But I'm telling the story the way it really was. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. But that's that not only for ancient travelers, but for modern travelers, too. That's always the first stop everybody goes to. So now they're entering a city full of Roman and Greek gods and temples. It's like Paul when he was in Athens. It bothered him so much. I said his spirit was agitated, and I'm sure it was again here today. So now who's his audience? He arrives. He does not have internet or a phone. He cannot make reservations for accommodations ahead of time. He has to get there. And unless he had some people who were going there earlier that he could set up arrangements, he would arrive and look for Jews right away because they're a very tight-knit society, the Jewish people. So they would look for Jews. And sure enough, he found Aquila and Priscilla. He was traveling with them, actually. And they found a young man named Apollos, who was a Jewish Christian who was very powerful in the scriptures. He didn't have all the truth about it yet, but he was teaching people and arguing with them. And Paul, once he found the Jewish people, then he was all set. Now he had a place to stay. They would take care of him. And he'd be going to their synagogue on the Sabbath, and he'd be talking to them in Ephesus. And there was a lot of people there, 250,000 we talked about last week. That was one of the largest cities in the Roman Empire, 250,000. But it says that he had an audience of 12 men in all. Now, you know, out of 250,000, he's talking to 12. Paul was happy to talk to 12 because if he could get them convinced of the gospel, he's really got a core of people. But I think it should really encourage you folks at Guadalupe, because if Paul's happy to speak to 12 men in all, I'm convinced that on Guadalupe Radio, you talk to more people in a day or two than Peter and Paul talked to in their whole lifetime because of the outreach that you have. So he says that he entered the synagogue, and for 3 months, he spoke boldly. I could just imagine his beard just wagging as he's talking. You know, a short man, bald-headed, a beard, knobby knees, and a big eyebrow all the way across. And he's just arguing. And some of them believed, but some were very stubborn and continued to. And finally, they get angry. That's what always happens. He goes in the Jews. They give him accommodations. They take care of him. And he comes in. They think he's a great scholar, and he is, more so than they are, actually. And he teaches them. And the next thing you know, they get arguing, and then they kick him out of the city, tried to kill him. They even one time went out and stoned him with rocks. And this had happened to him all the time. So then he found a lodging, and he went to what's called the Hall of Tyrannus. And we don't know where that is, but it was somewhere there was a hall. Probably a sponsor gave him this room where he could every day do debates with people. And some manuscripts, ancient manuscripts, suggest that he taught from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. every day during the heat of the day. He's out of the heat. But we also learn that he worked day and night so that no one else, he would not be a burden to anyone. What did he work at? It says he worked all night long. So he's teaching and preaching all day. And then in the evening, when it cools down, he goes out. And what does he do? He makes tents. And so does Aquila and Priscilla. Those are his partners that he came there with. So they make tents together. And that's how he makes a living. He doesn't say, okay, begging for money, give me money, everybody. Paul is a hard worker. He says, I work day and night, and I made my own living. We work day and night that we might not be a burden to any of you while we proclaim the gospel of God. And so I wish someone would have recorded all of his arguments and debates. Can you imagine if that had been recorded? If Luke would have just given us more information about that, it would have been fascinating. But they were long and drudgery. He stayed in Ephesus longer than any other city for 2 years. And I think that's significant because it says he continued for 2 years so that all the residents of Asia, that's the size of Turkey. Remember, we talked, of Texas. It's the country of Turkey and today, all of Texas. So for 2 years, all the residents of Asia heard the word of the Lord, both Jews and Greeks. That's because it's like the hub of the wheel in that area of the Roman Empire. So everybody's coming to Ephesus. Now, he heals. This is really cool. This is one of the reasons that Catholics have biblical foundation for the idea of relics. We believe in relics. We keep, we're actually kind of a morbid people collecting body parts and things. That's what I used to think when I was a Protestant. My goodness, you Catholics, you collecting morbid people. But I understand it now because that's our Hall of Fame. These are our heroes. They're our sports figures in a sense. They went into the arenas. They went into the sports arenas of the day and they fought to the death and they did not quit. They did not lose. To them, losing would be denying Christ. To win meant they went all the way to the death for Jesus. And so, but Paul, it says that people came to him with handkerchiefs. Okay, I have a handkerchief here. Okay, I carry this in my back pocket all the time. And they would bring a handkerchief or a napkin or a work apron, and they'd go and touch Paul with it. And then they'd run over to touch grandma who's sick, and they would be healed. It says God was doing extraordinary miracles by the hands of Paul, so that even handkerchiefs or aprons that touched his skin were carried away to the sick, and their diseases left them, and the evil spirits came out of them. Can you imagine why people were believing in the gospel? Nobody else in Ephesus could do that. Paul came in with this great power, not only with the words and arguments, but with great power. And he was curing diseases and just coming. I'd touch you, Keith, and the Holy, that you'd be healed of any diseases you have. So everybody's running to the nursing home and getting grandma and bringing her out to see Paul in the streets. Now, it happened to Peter, too, in Jerusalem. It was in his shadow. If people got in his shadow and the shadow went over, they were healed. So it's a biblical foundation for relics and sacramentals. In other words, God uses stuff. It's not all just spiritual like I used to think when I was a Baptist. God uses stuff, oil, water, handkerchiefs, shadows, because God made a world of stuff. He made a world that corresponds to us. Now, there's another interesting story that happened there. There were 7 sons of Sceva, S-C-E-V-A, Sceva, who were Jewish exorcists. Now, that's a very curious thing. They tried to get demons out of people, but once they saw what Paul was doing, casting demons out of people, they thought, wow, we want to get that power. He's way more better at it than we are, so we want to get this. So they would go to the demon and they would say to him, come out of them in the name of Jesus. Well, they're not Christian. They're these Jewish guys. And the demons say to them, we know Peter, we know Jesus, and we know Paul, but we don't know you. And it says the evil spirits answer them, Jesus I know, and Paul I recognize, but who are you? And the spirit pummeled them up, and they fled away naked and wounded. Can you imagine this in the middle of the city? They're trying to cast this demon out. Next thing you know, this one guy rips all the sons of Sceva's clothes off, beats them all up, and 7 guys run out of the room. I was in on an exorcism one time. I saw it back even before I was a Catholic, and I watched one little guy who was probably not more than 110 pounds. He picked 5 or 6 of us up off the ground. So these demons have extraordinary powers. But anyway, Paul was not afraid of them, and the demons were afraid of Paul because they knew the authority that he had in Jesus Christ to cast them out. Now I see I got 1 minute. Oh my goodness, we got less than it. Well, anyway, Demetrius was the silversmith. I want to just talk about the size. In the Ephesus was the temple of Artemis, and since there was a big deal with football last night, just tell you that this temple was longer than a football field, 180 feet wide, 377 feet long. Football field's only 300 feet long, 377 feet, 127 columns, 6 feet high. And this is where they said the statue of Artemis fell from the sky. So you could see why they were angry at Paul for denigrating their great statue, because they had it was the largest building in the Roman Empire at the time, and it was longer than that football field last night. And then Paul was turning people away from the god Artemis to Jesus Christ, and that's why they got in a big fight. And eventually he left and went out with all the chariots and so on, and left, and then he went away from Ephesus. But there we covered 2 years of Ephesus in less than 10 minutes.
Sacred Sites with Steve Ray is heard live every Monday on the Guadalupe Radio Network program Morning Joy, hosted by Keith Downey. For more authentic Catholic content, go to grnonline.com/joy.